Well, I have a log line, and it's not very good, and I want to run it by you
Okay.
and poke holes through it. Okay, so I just, I'm hoping we can deconstruct it. It's not very clear, and maybe you can help me clean it up. So a well-meaning librarian helps a prison writing group falling head over heels for someone entirely outside of her circle of friends and peer group, teaching her the meaning of true love. I know it sounds very cliche, but anyway. So it's too long? Is it too confusing? What's wrong?
Well, I don't think it's necessarily too long. If you need that many words to convey the story, then you need that many words. But I will say the thing that I think is a little bit confusing about it is it felt like it jumped from one story to another. So if I were going to help you workshop it, I would ask you who's your protagonist?
The librarian. She's highly educated, came from maybe a liberal world, but more of a privileged world, and she works in this library where they have a writing group, and some of the individuals there have been incarcerated, and now they've come out.
And what are we watching for sort of the bulk of the movie? Are we watching her work with writers, or are we? There was another part to the logline that I've forgotten now, but. Was it before she fell in love, there was something else?
I think well-meaning. Yeah, I had said that. So maybe it shows her life wanting to be involved in like community activism and things like that.
I thought there was a part about her going outside of her circle of friends.
Oh yeah, good point. No, this is great. She does. And so she's kind of from this like literati, very like upscale, discussing ideas, maybe college professors and people like that in her circle of friends.
Well, I think that part you can probably leave out of the log line, because it sounds like the movie that you're pitching is actually about this maybe somewhat privileged liberal librarian, well-meaning librarian who is working with a bunch of incarcerated writers, right? So that's kind of the main gist of your movie. Does that sound right?
Yeah, and maybe she's imprisoned by that world, and no pun intended, because she feels like she's got to still keep in competition with her peer group. Okay.
That may or may not fit in the log line. So what I usually tell people is that we want to focus on just the foundation elements that you need to tell your story. Start there, and then you can sort of like zhuzh it up to add color and detail if you're pitching it. But I would start with the protagonist, the story goal, so that main thing that she's trying to accomplish by the end of the movie, the main force of antagonism or opposition, and then some indication of the stakes is usually helpful, right? So that we understand why we should care about that story. So I start with those 4 things, and then I will say that there's like a stealth 5th element that you can include that sometimes makes it easier to convey the real sort of meat of your story, right? So if, just for example, if her story goal is to, I don't know, I think you said something about win the love of somebody, is that?
She falls in love with someone that's been incarcerated, and this individual is way outside of like her social circle and what she would consider in a mate.
Okay.
And she just can't help herself.
Okay. If that's not the A story, that might not belong in the log line either. But so I would say that whatever her story goal is, so whether it's to, get this writing group published in a national magazine, or whether it's to let's go with this one. Let's say that her ultimate story goal is she starts working with these writers, and her goal is to get funding to keep this program going because it's going to be canceled, right? So if that's her ultimate story goal, just putting that in the log line doesn't necessarily tell us what we're watching over the course of this movie, right? That's the entertainment value. We want to know, like, when we go see this movie, what are we in for? So that 5th stealth element that I was talking about is sometimes the method or the strategy that the protagonist is going to use to achieve that goal, because sometimes that gives us more of an indication of what's the actual movie that we're watching, right? So if her goal is to save this writing program, saying a well-meaning librarian strives to save the incarcerated prisoners writing program at her local prison, that doesn't actually tell us what we're watching. So if you include the method, then it's something like a well-meaning liberal librarian begins working with incarcerated women to put their stories on the page in order to save the writing program at their prison. Something like that. That doesn't really give us a sense of the opposition or the conflict, but it gives you kind of a start with some of those story elements, if that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah. I guess, and this is where I'm not being clear, is that she falls in love. It's actually a man, but it could be a woman. Yeah, it could, that is not what she thought Prince Charming would be, and she's been looking for this Prince Charming when this individual is right here, and he doesn't tick all the boxes that she thought. So it's more about her sort of journey as being in this group. She's a librarian. She's sort of an expert in her field, but then she falls head over heels for someone that she never expected that she would, and it causes a backlash for her.
Got it. So interestingly, when you read the logline, I thought that the main thrust of the story was her work with, or his work with, these incarcerated writers. But the way you're describing it now, it sort of seems like maybe the A story is really the romance. Is it about the relationship? Okay.
Yeah, I think it's her coming out of her shell and being with someone that she never thought she could fall in love with.
Okay, well, so in that case, I would totally change the logline, and I would say it would be something, because then really her work with the writers is just the setup. It's just the situation that gets her to meet this guy, essentially. Does that sound right?
Yeah, that's it. Mm-hmm.
So I would say after taking a new position, working with incarcerated writers, a well-meaning but, give me another descriptive word.
Oh, man.
Sheltered, naive?
Yeah, sheltered,
okay.
right. Like
a well-meaning but sheltered librarian falls in love with the most unlikely, the most unlikely suitor.
Okay.
And pursues a relationship with him, even though he's so far outside of her social circle that, I don't know, something else that happens in the story, so that we get the sense that it's a Romeo and Juliet type of story, right? Where there's like incompatibility on the surface, but they sort of have some sort of bond, right? That connects them. Does that sound right? Mm-hmm. So really, we get the sense that in that logline, we want to understand that what we're watching in this movie is really about this relationship between these two mismatched people. Exactly. But the fact that their connection, the strength of their connection makes this a love story worth watching, basically. So that's what we're trying to get in the logline.
Right.
Does that make sense?
That does. Okay. And I just realized this mirrors the movie White Castle, I think, with Susan Sarandon and James Spader.
Oh, I don't think I've seen that.
Oh, it's so good. Oh. Yeah. But it's flip-flop in that James Spader is the one that's from more of the privileged environment, and Susan Sarandon is like the single mom that's older, and she's brought to this like party and everyone just is totally quiet. Like and just the tension in the room, and it's so awesome.
Yeah, because the real main conflict of your story is about the fact that these two, shouldn't have fallen in love but did, right? And so it's about them trying to make their relationship work despite all of their differences and the unlikeliness of their relationship. Is that right?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, so that's what we want to get in the logline.
So then if I were to clean it up, because mine is a mess and it's all over the place, just a well-meaning librarian teaches a prison writing group?
Well, so I would probably start with the fact that she has that position teaching prisoners, because that's really just the setup. You just want to get that sort of like, this is the situation that gets her into this bigger situation, which is what the movie is about, right? So I would probably start with, after taking a position teaching incarcerated writers, a well-meaning but sheltered librarian forms an unlikely relationship with a guy from the wrong side of the tracks, or however you want to characterize him. I don't know if he's like if he's another prisoner or a prison warden or whatever.
He's done his time, and he's out, and he's done what he thinks to make amends. Okay,
so I would say forms an unlikely relationship with a guy, with an ex-con, and trying to figure out how to characterize the nature of that main conflict, which would be, they embark on forms an unlikely connection with an ex-con, and they embark on a whirlwind romance that tests both of their preconceived notions about love and the way to live your life or something like that.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
I like
You'll
it.
have to switch out those elements to be true to your story, but that's kind of like the structure of it that I would go for.
That's excellent. Yeah, I love it. And if we were to come up with a title for it, which I haven't,
Okay.
where would we go with a title to, would it be someone's name? Would it just be, you know, I don't know.
That's a good question. And I dislike titles. I dislike coming up with titles. But what I usually tell people is that if you're writing a spec script, be more clear than clever in your title, because I need to be able to hear that title again and remember what script that was, you know? So a good example, or a good exercise actually, is if you read the titles and the log lines for the scripts on the blacklist, and then put that list away for a week and come back to it and just read the titles, see if you can remember what log lines, you know, which log lines went with which titles. If you can't, then that's not a useful title to me as a person who's trying to remember which scripts I've read and what that script was about when somebody wants to ask me about it, you know? Does that make sense?
It does. So you said clever should be the last thing in a title.
I mean, I think cleverness in a title is great, and sometimes that can make it catchy, and that can make it, you know, have a sticky quality that will help you remember what that script was. But if it's like, for example, if you're writing a biopic about Seberg, right?
Right.
Just call it Seberg so that I can remember, when I see that title again, I'll remember exactly what that script was, you know?
Okay, I understand. Right. What, and not try to do something, you know, the French temptress, or, well, she wasn't French, but she ended up living in France. Yeah.
Yes.
So, okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if that's useful to you at all, but
No, it is. It is. And do you think with titles, the less is more in terms of words?
oh, I haven't actually thought about that directly, but I mean, I guess if you can convey what your script is about in fewer words, that's probably better. I won't say that's a hard and fast rule, but that's probably better.
Okay. Well, thank you for this log line, by the way.
Well, I will say that in a title, though, sometimes you do get a title that's long on purpose, and that's what makes it memorable. You know what I mean?
Right. 3 billboards out of Ebbing.
Outside of Ebbing, Missouri, right? I mean, like that. Nobody's going to forget when they may not remember the title off the top of their heads, but when they see it, they will remember what that movie is. So I don't know. I guess there's no hard and fast rules there. No right answers, no wrong answers.